Welcome to the highly anticipated session with Maria Ressa. And it's just such a thrill to have her here. I'm Janet Steele. I teach in the School of Media and Public Affairs at George Washington University. And I've actually been aware of Maria since the 1990s when she was the CNN bureau chief in Jakarta. And I think probably a lot of you know Maria from that and her amazing coverage of the fall of Suharto. And as she pointed out at her session the other day, Prabowo is back, which is certainly interesting. Some of the Maria has a wonderful book that I hope everyone buys. It's a slightly different edition here, How to Stand Up to a Dictator. And when you read it, you will learn all kinds of interesting things, including that she was a Fulbrighter. I didn't know that. She got a Fulbright and right out of Princeton. She's absolutely brilliant, which is probably not a surprise. But finished Princeton, went to the Philippines on a Fulbright in theater, but ended up doing the theater of real life journalism almost right away, and she's been doing journalism ever since. One thing for our Indonesian friends, when Maria was awarded the Nobel Prize, she was actually at a meeting, an online meeting, with the editors of Tempo and Malaysia Kini. Which I just think is wonderful.
Which you wrote books on both of them.
That's right. So next will be Rappler. No. So anyway, I love moderating panels, but I feel like this time you didn't come here to hear me. You came here to hear Maria. So I'm going to ask Maria just a couple of leading questions and then basically give her the floor to talk about whatever she wants to talk about. My first leading question, you start out, your title is How to Stand Up to a Dictator, but it seems to me it's also how to stand up to Facebook and the tech companies. So two struggles.
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you everyone for waking up early to come in. That's a big thing. But look, I think as we were going through, the attacks against us began in 2016. So it's really been a long time. And the question I was always asked was, how do you find the courage? But then you realize that courage isn't like, you don't pluck it out of the air. Courage comes from how you grew up, the values that you want to stand for. I talk a lot about drawing the line, because you have to draw the line where on this side you're good, and when you cross over, you're evil. Sorry, Roman Catholic, Indonesia was a fantastic learning experience for me. But when it's that clear, especially for the younger generation, then you stay on track. I'm really, really happy. I mean, I turned 61 in October, and I have not given up on my ideals. And I went into a country that told me as soon as I walked in, right after graduation, that if you're not corrupt, you're not going to succeed. You can succeed if you're not corrupt. And I think what's really alarming for me is that a lot of those same ideas and tactics that were there in 1986 in the Philippines, I now see in the developed democracies around the world, including the United States, right? So it's a scary time. So in this one, even though use of the word dictator, it was really hard for a journalist to use that. But you look at the definitions, and you can also replace dictator with bully, because that's actually how it begins, right? I think in all of it, I tried very hard to go macro, but then to go down to the micro. So even every chapter has a macro title, and then there's a personal lesson, which is the micro title, because that's the way I see the world. We start as each of us as individuals, and then together we become a collective whole. So the dictators, the bullies, starting with bullies, right? Bullies in school. You will not be surprised to know I was a nerd in school, really a nerd. But in order to not be a nerd, I did all of the things like play basketball. I'm still a nerd, which means you're not popular. And who would want to be in a perpetual popularity game? Which, by the way, is what our cell phones do today, right? Imagine being in college and having to deal with popularity all the time. That is, in many ways, what influencers is. Long-winded answer to your question. Look, the bigger dictator in the book is Mark Zuckerberg, because Rodrigo Duterte had a 6-year term limit. We elected him. Mark Zuckerberg has not been elected, and yet at the time when I finished writing the book, he had dominion over 3.2 billion people around the world.
You started out your relationship with, you call him Mark in the book. You had a good relationship
We
with
have a
him.
nice photo,
Yeah.
few photos together.
So tell us about the good years and then what went wrong.
Yeah, yeah. Look, this is my 38th year as a journalist, and when you've done as many stories, you realize that every story in news goes down to 8 archetypal stories. You know, the power of myth, that regardless of culture or language, that human beings, that we're motivated, that there are these myths that rule our lives, one of them being the hero myth, right? So I guess for me, after all of these stories, after living through, this is the most fantastic part of the career I had as a broadcast journalist. I started in 1986 with the People Power Revolt in the Philippines. I covered every single country in Southeast Asia's transformation from authoritarian one-man rule to democracy. And I watched the pendulum swing. That was the beginning of my career. It was so incredible. You know, Lee Kuan Yew handing it over. Then we go to Malaysia, Mahathir, Anwar, they're back to the future again. Then we go to Indonesia, right? 1986 to 1998 was incredible years where we felt democracy was unstoppable. Francis Fukuyama said it's the end of, right? Like, democracy was unstoppable. Boy, were we ever so wrong. Because at the tail end of my career, I began to see we could lose it all. Everything that we had fought for. Anyway, let me answer your question about
Rappler and Facebook in the early days. It sounded like you had a lot of cooperation and you worked with them and they were actually rather helpful.
Yeah. So, yeah. Now you remind me where. So every story in the end that you do as a reporter boils down to one issue. It is corruption, right? And we were fighting it top down because journalists are the connective tissue between the government and the people. This is how a democracy works, right? We derive our power from the people, but the people must know their rights. That's our danger today. Civil society, people do not know what they can demand. Anyway, as journalists here, I realized, oh my God, after 25 years of running after corruption, here comes Facebook, social media, that then allows every single person in the room to be able to come bottom up. And I thought, oh my God, this is transformative. So yes, I drank the Kool-Aid. You know, I went from CNN almost 2 decades, a decade in the Philippines, a decade in Indonesia, and then went and led the largest news group in the Philippines. So I went from managing 4 people to 35 people at most for CNN, and then going to 1,000 journalists in the Philippines. So many lessons to learn there. But then that's when we asked every Filipino with a cell phone, during elections in particular, to capture. You can't be everywhere, right? But imagine if every citizen becomes a watchdog. And in the 2010 elections that was transformative. In Tagalog, in Filipino, we called it boto mo, ipatrol mo. Patrol your votes. So we would get things like, a photo of a politician, of a mayor campaigning using city funds, which he shouldn't be doing. So that's an easy one, right? But then you also get things like, I don't know if you remember in 2009, the Ampatuan massacre, where it is the largest single election-related violence globally until today. That's CPJ, the Committee to Protect Journalists, saying that 58 journalists were in broad daylight killed, shot down, and then a government backhoe in broad daylight dug a mass grave. The very first photo of that, all the journalists were held in the city. They weren't allowed to come to the site. The first photo came from, I would call him a citizen journalist, but he was a soldier. And he sent it to us as part of Patrol Your Votes. We saw the body spread eagled on the ground, and it took us maybe 24 hours to verify that the Toyota High Ace van was actually part of the convoy, and then we went out with it, right? A soldier didn't want a whitewash. So it gave me tremendous hope that we can do together what journalists could never do alone. Anyway, what a long story, but those are my hopes for Facebook. And from, I would say from if you think about from 2012 until 2014, it did give us that hope.
Right, you that in the Philippines there was something called what, free basics, and so
Oh, yeah.
you could get. I'm based on your book, and you could get Facebook for free, and then you all were participating in something called internet.org, where your
Yes.
story you posted your stories directly to Facebook, which I'm sure in retrospect was a mistake.
But this is how crazy we were. If Facebook had had better search, I may not even have created the website, right? It didn't, but it was really astronomical growth. Imagine Little Rappler with 12 people, we were beating the largest news sites because we were posting directly on Facebook. Of course, it's only much later that I realized, oh my God, they have such power. Look, what we did was we asked everyone with a cell phone to join us. That's incredible. But of course, by 2014, when did Mark Zuckerberg hire Sheryl Sandberg? 2008. And then by 2014, the weaponization of social media was already in full swing.
Right.
And then 2016, so it took roughly 2 years, and it was geopolitical power. It took 2 years for the political tipping point to happen globally, and it didn't happen in one country. It happened in every single country where Facebook had dominion.
Right. It's so interesting because, Maria, you and Rappler anticipated a lot of the things that Facebook would later do, including you were the innovators of this measuring the mood of readers. Can you tell us why you did that and what you found?
It's so wonderful when your moderator reads the book. Thank you. No, look, I don't know if you remember, in 2011, Harvard University gave BlackBerries to 100 students. And then those students knew that every data point was being sent back, right? So I looked at that and I was like, oh my God, based on what those 100 students were doing with their BlackBerry then, you could see, number one, oh, that's the hottest night spot on Friday night, right? Because they'd all be there. And, oh, this is how the flu spreads, right? So many things that you can see. Or, oh, there's a breakdown in public transportation because they're stopped. So this is extremely powerful if used for good. So we decided that, look, actually, it was because I was following how the virulent ideology behind Al-Qaeda spread through our region, right? So the Indonesian suicide bombers, right? The 2002 Bali bombings. I looked at the last stories I did for CNN. My first book was called Seeds of Terror. And essentially, I looked at how social networks spreads this virulent ideology that leads to mass bombings, right? That what is it about a young, idealistic, and they were largely boys, men, that would radicalize them and make them carry out suicide bombings, right? I mean, from 2002 to 2006, Indonesia had a bombing every year. And they were all, I remember them like they happened yesterday because I was in many ways first on the scene. So what we did was we followed social network analysis, right? And that small things like a friend of a friend, I now know that I am. So the way things spread is the way I looked at the world and the way I thought about Rappler. Social network analysis, there are really only three ways in social network analysis. You have big players, right? Those would be, if you're thinking about this in social media, 1 million people following a star, right? That's a big influencer. But then you have the micro influencers where smaller numbers of people, less than 1,000 people, will follow them, but all those people are their family and friends. There's greater trust because it's smaller. And then the key people are something called boundary spanners, right? So you and I are boundary spanners to each other. My Indonesian friends, Gunawan Muhammad, right? We're boundary spanners to each other. Janet and I are boundary spanners, meaning we know each other. We can spread, she will spread an idea to her network, and I can spread an idea to my Filipino network. That's the way information cascades happen. What a long answer to your question. But I looked at how can we get news to cascade, because news is really boring, right? You really only come to news when a disaster happens. You're coming to news a lot more now because of the climate. But in the Philippines, we had an average of 20 typhoons every year. So we had something called a mood meter. We rolled this out in 2012, and part of that was to be able to see. It isn't scientific. It's not like a statistical survey, but you can see how moods travel in stories. We rolled out the mood meter 4 years before Facebook had an emoji. And boy, I really feel bad now that I talked to Facebook about emotions. Of course, they were
stole your
discovering
idea?
it.
Did they steal your idea?
I wouldn't say that. I thought it was an idea that, but certainly we were out 4 years before. And I think the difference there is we were literally trying to use this technology for good.
You know what I love about this too, that you did not share the results with the reporters, so they don't know which stories are the most popular or make people feel happy. Why did you not share with the reporters?
Because you don't want your reporters pursuing popularity, right? It is about the most important stories require long times to actually, first, sources who will trust you, but the most important stories tend to not be popular, right? It's not entertainment. The world is not entertainment. To fix the problems of the world require rigorous discussion, debate, and a really vibrant democracy. This is what I've learned through the years.
It's so interesting, Maria, because there are really two big storylines in this book. One is you and the dictators, the actual physical dictators, Duterte and now Junior Marcos, and from 11 cases against you to 2. Maria said she still has to get permission to leave the country. It's terrible. But the other story, which is equally compelling, is this odd relationship you have had with Facebook, where it started out good. It's almost like a love story gone really bad. I mean, really bad. Because you described this meeting in Singapore in 2013, and you and Mark, and everybody's all happy. And then when did you realize this is a pact with the devil you've made, rather, to talk about a mixed metaphor here, but this is not going to be a happy relationship.
Faustian bargain. It's a Faustian bargain, right? As a reporter, I've learned to walk in someone else's shoes and not to judge, right? Because, I mean, look, living in Indonesia and reporting on what happened in Indonesia during these incredible years taught me so much. When did that Faustian bargain? I would think I gave Facebook tremendous leeway because we were essentially alpha partners. We knew Southeast Asia, and in particular the Philippines, better than Facebook did. They didn't open an office in the Philippines until 2016, April of 2016, a month before Rodrigo Duterte was elected. And Duterte was elected with the help of Facebook, right? So when did I I would say by 2018.
That
right?
late?
That late. Because look, in 2017, I think Facebook was just waking up to their global power. It's almost like, this they were running after money, but they didn't realize, and this was in 2016 or 2017 when I was sitting down with Mark and I said, you should come to the Philippines. He did, by the way, put Indonesia on his schedule. But I was trying to invite him, and this is when I think he was thinking of running for president, but he was going to do that tour of the United States, and his wife had just gotten pregnant. And he said all of these things, I first need to learn my country. I said, you will never realize how powerful you are until you see what happens when 100% of the people, well, at that point, it was only 97% of Filipinos on the internet were on Facebook. Facebook was our internet, right? So I believed in him. After that, my God, I think that year I spoke to over almost 60 different officers in Facebook, thinking it was just ignorance. I don't know how it can be so ignorant when the data was there, but they didn't know. But I know when they did know, because they pulled us all together in 2017 with their product teams. I'm just trying to think if my NDA is already done. Wait, let me see, 2017, 2018, 2019, 20. It's done. So my 5-year NDA is done. So we were all together. This is when, the vegetable team, right? Like, this is what a news organization does. There is your vegetables, which is investigative reporting. But how do you get people to go to your vegetables? You got to give them sugar at the top. And then that's the funnel that drills down. So we had a meeting in Menlo Park. I thought it was going to change. And then by January 2018, Mark Zuckerberg basically tells people, we're leaving news. If you look at it, right, the world's largest distribution platform for news began choking traffic starting in January 2018. And then what happened in March? Cambridge Analytica. And then, later, we now have all the evidence. When Frances Haugen came out with more than 10,000 of Facebook's internal documents, you realize they knew and they were fighting internally. All you have to do is stop this one feature and you will prevent violence. Oh, but you will lose maybe 0.0% of your revenue. So that's the Faustian bargain. How much money are you willing to give up for safety? That's why I think governments need to step in and demand. It isn't the private companies.
One thing that surprised me was how much research you have done all along. I didn't know this. And actually going back to the Al Qaeda network, there's a whole chapter in her book about the war on terror and how you actually built up a database because of your contacts with the Filipino police, with Indonesia's security people, when there was no other database. So that's just a different chapter. But she did the same thing with Facebook and how it works and presented this data, and nobody did anything. And at one point, I think you say part of the problem is there were so many different offices in Facebook, and you got the feeling that, you might have convinced the people you were talking to, but they weren't sharing that with anybody who could make a difference. Is that accurate?
And primarily because what is the purpose of Facebook? Aside from the engineers and the data scientists, their primary purpose is to sell, to market to us. Their primary purpose is their growth, right? And you'll know this now from Mark Zuckerberg himself. He'll say company over country, right? Profit over safety, essentially. So, no, look, what I learned in mapping, we're in Ubud, but the Bali bombers, literally, we did link analysis of every single one. And it was an incredible time to be a journalist because the Southeast Asia at that point didn't have a strong database. And so I would go to the intelligence in the Philippines, in Malaysia, in Singapore, in Indonesia. And that was the discovery of putting everything together through link analysis, right? That's the first phase. Link analysis became social network analysis. Imagine the 2002 Bali bombings had three brothers involved, right? They were always families, clusters. Now imagine today what happened. Those processes of radicalization, and they are radicalization, are now released in the general population among our kids. That is, sorry, that is what happens. That is radicalization. So we are being forced into extremism, in the way we think and the way we act.
I think that we all know Maria Ressa is the champion of freedom of expression and independent media and why she won the Nobel Prize. But I think most of us had no idea of what a tremendous researcher and investigator she is. I mean, I was kind of blown away. I think it's what page it's on. You point out that Facebook has shut down the API. Well, for my people, the academics, this is really important. That's the application programming interface, which allows us to know what Facebook is really doing. Well, Maria was following this. I mean, she truly is brilliant and just a complete Renaissance woman. The things that you know how to do are astonishing. Could we go on? Something you talked about in your session the other day that I think people were really interested in was, what was the problem when Facebook said, friends and family, that's what we're going to do now? Why is that bad? What's wrong with me just communicating with my friends and family?
Oh my gosh. It's so many ways, but in a big picture, it's almost like giving you sugar, just letting you have as much sugar as you want. And let me put it, I hate using the concept of a drug war, but it's almost like, getting you addicted and then giving you all the drugs that you want. In the book, I quote Yuri Andropov, who's a former KGB chairman, former head of the Soviet Union. He said, disinformation is like cocaine. You take it once or twice, you're okay. But if you take it all the time, you become an addict, a changed person. So essentially, what Facebook did was to turn us all into addicts and then give us as much of the drug as we want. And this is by design. So over time, we have become diseased, I think, and this is globally.
So, all right, there were two back. Oh, I turned it off because of feedback issues. And
You want to, I can give you this.
okay,
It's on again? Yes,
Yeah.
it's on again. Sorry. There was a little feedback, and I thought maybe it was because of this microphone. So why did that change in their model? What did it actually do to us? And why are we no longer seeing stories from Rappler?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So look, even before, I think one of the ideas, and this is fascinating how behavioral economics, neuroscience, for example, has grown because of what they do, right? There's a book called Socialnomics, and this came out much, much earlier before Facebook really became so dominant, where it came out that all of us, human beings, we trust our family and friends. 94%. 94% of us trust our family and friends more than we trust institutions. That's a given, right? Your family and friends, you'll go to them for restaurant recommendations, for things like that. And yet what happens? Your family and friends don't necessarily have the facts, right? They're not anchored on facts. And so what Facebook did, and this is where I talk in the book about hacking our biology, what they did was they gutted institutions. And the first institution of trust that they didn't mean to do it, but at a certain point, you actually realize they did. The first institutions attacked were news organizations. Because when you, and again, look at Russian military doctrine, where information warfare has always been part of Russian military doctrine, if you can break down trust, you begin to win. And what did Facebook do by just focusing on family and friends? what was a system of advertising and marketing became a system of breaking down trust. And what do I mean by that? It goes down to this sentence I've said over and over since 2016: facts, truth, and trust, right? Because by design, social media spreads lies 6 times faster. That's a 2018 MIT study. So it is worse today than it was in 2018, right? So let you assume lies spread 6 times faster. All right. And then if you lace it with fear, anger, and hate, it goes viral. So think about how the world is turned upside down. If that is the incentive structure, there's no incentive to tell the truth. There's no incentive to be honest. If you want to spread information, you tweak and pound on fear. You tweak and pound on the worst of humanity. And what that did is it literally brought us to a place where illiberal leaders exploited the platform, social media, and we the people began electing illiberal leaders democratically, to the point that VDEM in Sweden, as of January last year, said that 71% of the world today is now under authoritarian rule. Also, to the point that Southeast Asia has gone back to the future,
Yeah.
right? It isn't a coincidence that President Marcos in the Philippines, or President Prabowo in Indonesia, or President Anwar, the prime, I mean, that we are living through this. So,
Or maybe President Trump.
Brett, don't say this yet. We're all watching.
One of the themes you repeat throughout the book often is the problem of groupthink and how easy it is to rile up a mob against a target.
Oh, wow.
Now, talk us through again how that's related to the friends and family thing. Why we now have groupthink and or working up mobs.
Yeah. Oh, so sorry, I didn't explain facts, truth, and trust, right? If lies spread faster, you say a lie a million times, it becomes a fact. If you don't have facts, you can't have truth. Without truth, you can't have trust. Without these three, we can't have a shared reality. We can't have democracy. So here's something I learned in Indonesia: how quickly really kind people can turn into a mob. And I'll talk about. I don't think I put this in the book, but there was this very wonderful man who worked with us at CNN for a long time, and he was telling me before the riots in Jakarta that led to the fall of Suharto, he was saying how before that he was already casing his ethnic Chinese neighbor's house because he was looking at the television. Like, he is the kindest man, and yet this was already something they had expected a mob to happen at one point in 1998, right? So look, how easy. Let me pull it up to macro level. There's 3 ways that this stuff affects us collectively. The first is at an individual level, right? So imagine now that geopolitical power, whether it's domestic or international, can come to the cellular levels of a democracy, people, and insidiously manipulate how we feel, which means it changes the way we look at the world, which means it changes the way we act, i.e. the way we vote, right? That's information operation. So that's at the level of insidious manipulation. The second is we behave differently in groups. And in the book, I love having a nerd moderator also, but like in the book, you go back to the 60s, the Ash study. You guys familiar with Solomon Ash? He came out with these studies where people in groups behave differently than they would if they were alone. So the one that I pull out is the line, like there's the first 6 people in the front row. If you're a case study, I give you just a paper and you choose the shortest line. The case study is the last person. Everyone in the group, the first 5, will choose the longest line. So here's the last person who's being tested, and she says she listens to everyone choose the longest line. And that person, even though they know which one is the shortest line, they will be affected by the group. And 75% of people tested will choose the longest line, right? 75% will follow the group, 25% will stand up against the group. That's that's the ASH study. And then the last one, which is actually still controversial, is the Stanford prison experiment. And I looked at all of this in the context of terrorism, how we create terrorists, right? And so we behave as a group, mob rule, right? Again, in the book, I talk about the wisdom of the crowds, which is what we would have wanted, that together, the wisdom of crowds, if you have four qualities together, we can actually be smarter than Einstein. And yet, if you take away those four traits, we act like a mob. And what Facebook has consistently done since 2018, when it began to realize the power it had, is to encourage the mob.
Yeah. And strong feelings like anger. The anger emoji is, I think, the favorite because it means people feel very strongly about something.
And they keep scrolling.
Right.
But also in the Philippines, we could back this up. From 2012 to 2016, Filipinos, the most popular mood every year was happy. We're a happy people. And then 2016, wow, it became angry, off the scale. And it was angry until 2018, which was really incredible to me.
Well, a couple of other big themes, and I've been instructed 10 minutes, we open it up to questions, so be prepared for
Great.
your questions. But I have a few more.
Okay.
Another theme that is so important is the use of free speech to pound free speech. So tell us how that works and why this is a big problem.
Yeah. So sorry, before I answer the free speech question, so the last one, which I forgot to tell you, is research that still needs to be done. So if you're a researcher, please look at this. It's emergent human behavior, right? Because when we are together at scale, it's now more than 3.2 billion of the 7 point something billion people on the planet are on these platforms. When we act together at scale, there's these properties, emergent human behavior. You know, like the way birds fly south. The birds don't know where they're going, but it is the entire group that actually finds its way there. Emergent human behavior means that this technology that you carry in your pocket is literally changing our evolution as human beings, right? So what does that mean? Will we become an angrier species, right? Because that is so emergent human behavior is, this is what we're living through, and it's making me slightly crazy when ChatGPT, when large language models came, and now I worry that our next generation is not going to know how to write or how to think critically.
Absolutely. Maria's also a teacher now. She's teaching at Columbia's, which I didn't know either. Okay, back to free speech. Louis Brandeis, Supreme Court Justice, says the way to counter hate speech is more speech. He said that in 1927. What has changed in the last 100 years?
It doesn't work anymore, right?
And why not?
Well, imagine I'm going to, I'll do an information operations here, right? Everyone in the room can tweet that we are in Ubud, but then I'm going to tweet 1 million times that we're in London, right? Guess who wins, right? We're going to be in London. Doesn't matter what your reality is. So this is part of the problem. This is not a free speech issue. The big tech companies have spent a lot of money lobbying. In the United States, 2 years ago, it was $70 million annually. 2 years ago, in the EU, when they were debating the Digital Services Act and the Digital Markets Act, 125 million euros. So we don't even have updated numbers, but big tech is now the largest lobbying. They now beat fossil fuels, their lobby. Anyway, so what are they saying? They're saying, be careful, you're going to lose your free speech issues. This is not a speech issue. It is algorithmic. It is about data. It is about insidious manipulation. It is about surveillance for profit. And for us, it is about reclaiming our rights, because you do not want to be insidiously manipulated by powers that bypass our rational thinking. So, Sacha Baron Cohen said many years ago now that this isn't freedom of speech, it is freedom of reach, right? Who said that lies should spread 6 times faster? Imagine again if you're teaching your kid to lie all the time. This is what these platforms are doing to our kids.
So this goes beyond Elon Musk offering $1 million every day to voters.
Oh my God, and I can't believe he's doing that and getting away with it with impunity. Right, sorry.
And so his whole thing is that now X, formerly known as Twitter, is as a free speech platform. So tell us why this is problematic.
It actually isn't, because if you think about it, and I mean, look, let me walk right into the elections, into the U.S. elections. In many ways, what hasn't been factored in is that the very ways that we are connected to each other, those platforms are not news organizations that are supposed to, we do our best with standards and ethics to give you the information, but to let you make your decision. These new technology companies that have taken over the distribution of information of your social networks, these social media companies literally put their thumb on the scale in any election. Who wins? The person that harnesses digital populism. What is that? It means using fear, anger, and hate. It means using what was designed into the platform to hack your biology, trigger your fear, and create the mob, right? Literally. Sorry, I sound so. This is not a good Monday morning. I mean, a good morning chat, right? But I think we have to be aware how the design and how our data and how vulnerable we are to this type of manipulation. So here, by design, these platforms will work against a woman who is not white and who is not trying to trigger hate, right? So the question for anyone in politics is, are you willing to actually incite fear, anger, and hate?
Right. And here we haven't even gotten to misogyny and dehumanization, which were other topics I wanted to raise. You had mentioned you would like to say a few things about the U.S. election and about deep fakes and AI. And before we open it up to questions, what would you like to tell us about that?
I mean, I said this briefly yesterday, but let's talk about the tech again, right? Whether it is AI. Artificial intelligence is neither artificial nor intelligent, right? This is a marketing phrase that came out 70 years ago. So these are a lot of nerds that have literally tried to figure out how to teach a machine. And frankly, of all the technology that we have, machine learning, which is the most rudimentary one, is still the most accurate. Machine learning is what these tech companies have used to build a model of each of us on their platforms. Replace the word model with clone. So using machine learning, they can clone us. Consumer Reports said a few months ago that Facebook alone takes more than 2,300 data sets to create each of our clones. And why is that important? Because artificial intelligence comes in and harnesses all of our clones. That becomes the motherlode database for micro-targeting, meaning they have our clones, they take our weakest moment to a message and sell it to a company or country, right? So we are truly commodified. But that's the first generation of artificial intelligence. What's the next one? The one that we're talking about, ChatGPT, 10 foundational large language models that are literally being hyped up. Generative AI is this concept that if you take everything that you keep feeding the machine, everything, every data point, that it will get smarter. It's a thesis that hasn't been proven, but in 2023, more than $23 billion was invested in this, and companies like OpenAI need to continue raising money to be able to do this. And how do they do that? They sell it to us. They sell it to investors, right? So what does that mean? Please know that generative AI is a probabilistic machine. Garbage in is garbage out. And a big chunk of what was thrown into each one of the 10 foundational models is actually the crap of social media, right? Garbage in is garbage out. So please be aware, none of the technology that we are carrying with us is anchored in facts, right? If your life depended on it, do not trust it. Go back to a news site that at least you can sue if they're wrong. But no, go back and look at the facts. So that's the first. I think the second thing is that it is wrong that we are being experimented on in real time. Let me put this in the context of a drug company, right? A drug company, not even the COVID vaccine, couldn't be tested in the public. But essentially, what these tech companies do is roll it out to each of us, right? So here, I have drug A. I'm going to give it to this part of the room. Drug A, you try it. This is going to make you great. This part of the room, I'm going to give you drug B. Oh, drug A, you died. So sorry. This is what is happening, right? Genocide in Myanmar. Has anyone been held accountable despite the fact that both the UN, and you know who led the UN panel, it's Marzuki Darusman, the former he was Commission on Human Rights and also former Justice Secretary, right? So he led it, and then Meta sent its own people to Myanmar, and they both said in their reports that Facebook enabled the violence, and yet no one is accountable. Nothing changed, and in 2024, we all voted. The people who voted with less guardrails, less safety measure in place than there were in 2020 because Elon Musk brought the bar so low. Let me end with just this. We see the Q&A. We need to demand better, right? These should not be tried out for each of us because essentially who pays the price for the experimentation and the hundreds of billions of dollars these companies make every year? You do. Your kids, governments pay the price. And that's part of the reason we must do something about it. I mean, and let me end with what's the solution? In the long term, it is education. We all need to understand and learn to code. Sorry, coding is super boring, but we don't need to actually do it ourselves if you get the principles. When regulators regulated airplanes and air travel, they didn't have to know how to build an airplane, right? When that door to the airplane fell off, the company CEO resigned. There were lawsuits that were in place. That's not even genocide, right? So again, education in the medium term, good God, please, some form of legislation to protect us. It's a safety issue. And then finally, in the short term, it is just us, right? We have to actually act. I think that's what you'll see in the book is evidence, 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 data that shows you why we are where we are today.
Okay, so we don't get yelled at about questions and answers. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to try to be as fair as I can and get as many questions in, which means please ask your question really quickly, okay? You in the front.
You. Microphones?
We need a microphone in the front.
Oh, I'm all over.
Thank you. Thank you again, Maria. Just so inspiring. My question is, you have a room full of people who read and write, and we are not yet redundant, but that time may be coming. What do you want everyone in this room to do? Maybe not this afternoon, because there are some other great people to listen to, but what should we do before we forget what you have told us today?
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your question.
Maybe we could do like 2 more quick questions and then hurry. Okay.
Okay.
How about you right there? Easy. And then 3 women. I like that. Go ahead.
Please tell me your name.
Hi, Maria. Very inspiring. Thank you so much. And, just drawing on your experience in the Philippines and also in Indonesia, where I think our exposure, the time that we spend on social media is equally ridiculous. And
Indonesians spend the most time on Twitter.
I don't, yes.
X,
And
sorry.
also where literacy level is dangerously kind of low. What can we do where kind of, and looking at your citizen journalism view, how do you trust the people, the citizens, when they have a phone and they're feeding it with social media? Education level is low and literacy level is low. I mean, how do you depend on this group of people?
Great question. And then the third question from right there, and then we'll let Maria answer all of them.
Evan.
Hi, Maria. Thank you so much. My question has to do around the ownership and governance models of digital infrastructure that's penetrated every aspect of our lives.
Yes.
What in your opinion, what would a future digital infrastructure geared towards a progressive politics rooted in social and environmental justice looks like? Thank you.
Okay, 3 great questions.
Wow, fantastic. Thank you so much. So what do we do? I think, and these are all kind of connected, the first 2 questions, right? Let me take the Indonesia one first because that's really important. You know, saya tinggal di Jakarta 10 taon. Tapi bahasa Indonesia saya belum lancar. I'm just saying I lived in Jakarta for a decade, but my Indonesian still sucks. So it isn't about the people. It isn't the fault of the people. It is almost like saying you died because of a bad drug that this company gave you, that it is your fault, right? This is one of the debates that the companies always say, well, it is human nature that does this. That is also wrong. They exploit the weakness of human nature to reward the worst of humanity, right? We've had this happen in many different countries around the world, and we have all lived through parts of violence. But what society and what democracies do is bring a sense of justice. This becomes impossible given the public information ecosystem that we have today. So this connects to the next question, which is, what are we going to do? Think about it like this. Right now, every government around the world has ceded responsibility for public infrastructure on the internet to private companies, right? There have only been a few, like France and Germany, for example. They built all their government websites on the Matrix protocol. The Matrix protocol is open source, it's encrypted end to end, and that's where, so France and Germany, they care about data privacy. That's why they did that. Taiwan, because it's been fighting China forever, Taiwan began building something called deliberative technology on the Matrix protocol. What does that mean? It means that you don't have algorithms that are manipulating you, and it means that your data is not being sold. So you are not being commodified in this. So the first question really is for governments, right? We have public libraries, public parks. What's our public information ecosystem in the virtual world look like? Why is that not a priority, given that, as you pointed out, everything has moved online? The second point that goes hand in hand with that is, why do the laws in the physical world, which have taken all of our nations forever to get to a balance, why do those laws not apply in the virtual world, right? Why do we accept the thesis that that they're different when there's only one of us, that actually there's one person in the real world that's the same person in the virtual world? Manipulation in the virtual world, mob rule in the virtual world leads to those same things in the real world, right? Online violence is real world violence. This is something that has been proven over and over and over. So let me talk about some potential solutions and ownership and governance model, right? I'm the vice chair of the Internet Governance Forum, the leadership panel of that. Vint Cerf, who is the father of the TCP/IP protocol. He is with Google now, but he is the chair. And we constantly debate software versus infrastructure. we've gotten to a point. The Internet Governance Forum is a global organization that literally, without one country or one force dominating it, they did this by consensus. It's like having a condo, right? And we meet. Except now we're not empowered to do this with software, because, guys, in the end, this is about power and money, and there have been no restrictions in place to prevent our commodification. So what do? I think yesterday I pointed out that I'll tweet, I'll put this on X. I hate to bring you to X, but I will tweet something that we built in the Philippines called the Matrix Protocol chat app. We're looking hopefully for 4 countries to join us. One of them this year, South Africa, Indonesia, Brazil, and the Philippines. We piloted it in the Philippines beginning December last year. Again, what is this? I'm tired of taking our communities, people I know, people who will stand for democracy, and throwing them into the manipulations of big tech. So we built a chat app like Signal, if you're familiar with Signal, right? The only reason we chose the Matrix over the Signal protocol is because Matrix is supported by governments. Isn't that crazy? The world needs governments. It's really a 3-legged stool, right? Government, civil society, and I'll include journalists in that civil society, and then the economic system that keeps the checks and balances together. So that's what's broken. The last thing I'll say here is this. It's a really difficult time. And the parts where there have been successes globally have been when people, the citizens, move out of here and organize and demand better in the real world. Perfect example, the first elections that really was, I thought, oh my God, we still have hope. This is Poland. Do you remember what happened in Poland? This is the end of 2023, before 60% of the world began to vote in 2024. Poland had a right, not quite far right, but it had already a rightist government in place, in power. And everyone thought they would win again because they were in power. They passed an abortion law that brought women and the youth out in the streets, organized themselves, redefined what civic engagement meant, and they won the elections. Taiwan, another instance, right? It's interesting. Where do we put Indonesia, right? Because Indonesia, like the Philippines, we spend a lot of time. The Filipinos are largely Facebook. Indonesia is X, is Twitter. The top city on Twitter is Jakarta, globally, right? So the question there is, what about our youth? How do you stop insidious manipulation? Starting in 2014, it was Prabowo and Jokowi, and the fight was on Twitter. How has it shifted? How do you prevent geopolitical power, Russia, China, coming in and taking advantage, manipulating you? These are all questions that you can see the answers to on data. Why are the tech companies not be forced to be transparent so we can have accountability?
One really positive thing that just happened in Indonesia just 2 months ago were the student demonstrations and pro-democracy activists who, said no to the idea that Parliament was going to overturn a constitutional court ruling. So there's hope, I think. We maybe have time for 3 more very quick questions from the back. If you just bam, 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 the 3 questions. Any hands in the back? I don't see any. That's where the microphone is.
Hello. Thank you for a great session. You just mentioned the word insidious. In the last 12 months, a lot of people have lost faith in mainstream media. We see what's happening with the genocide in Gaza, and we see the Western media, and we see that it's night and day. So people are going to X because we're seeing real-time reports. So what is your forecast for where do we look when we see the Western media is lying?
That's a great question.
we've been told time out, but I have it's 5 minutes of 10. What, do you guys have 10 or 5 minutes of 10? I think we've got 5 minutes left. Sorry to overrule the festival, but
I'll just answer this question.
please answer.
Okay,
I think we
this
got
is
5
a
minutes left.
fantastic question, and I'll try to answer in 2 minutes. So how did we? Let me first say how we got here, and then what we need to do about it. The first is that understand that the commodification of journalism meant that the incentive structure was also upside down, right? All of those news organizations, and I put them in quotes, BuzzFeed, Vice, these have now closed shop. The ones that first went on digital, because the incentive structure of social media to get the widest distribution rewarded crappy journalism, right? So think about that as a commodification of journalism. And that meant that news organizations needed to actively, this is why we prevented our reporters from seeing the numbers of social media, right? So that's the first. The second is that the first targets of attack in every country around the world were the news organizations. Because if you can break down trust, then you break down democracy, right? It's not about trying to make you believe one thing. It's about making you distrust everything so that you cannot act in the real world. That's the second point. And now let me more directly answer your point. Please understand, and this is not an excuse for traditional journalism. I'm watching the United States now, and let's talk about American media. That's easier than, because I actually think we in Southeast Asia have been far ahead of the West in terms of dealing with media ownership, in terms of dealing with political power through media ownership, right? I mean, in Marichka Schake's book, The Tech Coup, she essentially equates Putin with the tactics of dictators with the tactics of big tech, media capture, academic capture, NGO capture, right? Across the board. They use the same tactics. In the United States right now, it's funny, just overnight, we watched the Washington Post and the LA Times just say that they're not choosing. They're going against what they've established in the past, and they're not going to support a candidate. They're not going to. And it's funny because the Washington Post said, well, we've only done this in the past when it was extraordinary. This is not extraordinary, apparently, right? This is a battle for the soul of a democracy. So part of that is because it is also about power and money. I think it's interesting that both those organizations, and I'm saying things I shouldn't say, this is for you only. Every billionaire is making a calculation of where they can make more power and money, right? Where they can get more power and money. And I saw this in the Philippines. Really good people stayed quiet. Really excellent values-driven businesses ducked, right? It's there's a Japanese saying, and I think Indonesia has its own variation. The nail that stands up gets the hammer. This is one of those times when the nails need to stand up together, and the more of us who stand up, the better it is. So let me answer your question. Where are you going to go for news you can trust? And I know we got to go. All right. Where can you go? Unfortunately, I will push you to go beyond Twitter. We really have to go. Because if you're in X, you're being insidiously manipulated by design, right? Right now, in the United States, we saw Chinese, Russian, Iranian information operations specifically targeting the campus protests. So be aware, right? Not everything you see, and what does that mean? That will make you more distrustful. So I suggest move into the physical world. Demand better from every one of your governments. Look, what's at stake globally is whether our international rules-based order still exists. We all believe it must and it should. So impunity must stop. And that is whether it is a Putin or a Netanyahu. We must demand an international rules-based order still work. That means those people in power need to stand up and stop the violence. I'll shut up. Thank you.
Thank you.
I thought I was talking.